What a blessing to be with you this morning. I hope you've had a blessed week. We have food bank this week, and I don't generally take time to have a sermon to speak about that, but we're going to be kind of short-handed. Larry's kind of down on us a little, and David probably won't be here, so if you're able to help Thursday, we probably need the help. That would be appreciated. Also, we're going to fill the boxes tonight after church, which we haven't done that before, but because we're kind of short on the men that do that, we're going to do that after services tonight. So if you're able to stay after services and help fill the boxes, that would be much appreciated. The art of motherhood. You know, I told Susie last night, we was coming in, and I told Susie, I said, you know, you gave me the best gift that anyone could ever give me. You gave me my children. And I believe that. What a blessing my children have been in my life, and what a wonderful mother Susie has been to them for so many years and continues to be a wonderful mother to them. But you know, motherhood is it's a gift. It's a blessing from God, and there's an art to being a truly good mother. I believe that. It's the women in my life who have been mothers to me are more than just my mother. There's been a lot of women in my life that have been so influential in the way that I am, the way that I think, the person that I've become. And even later in life, as I got older, I've had a lot of those women within my life who done so much to challenge me and nurture me and help me to grow into the person that I am. And I believe a true mother, the mother that we think is truthfully an artist of an individual. And you know, when you think about life and you think about life that comes, it's from God, isn't it? In Psalms 139, it says, you formed my inward parts, you wove me in my mother's womb. I will give thanks to you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works, and my soul knows it very well. The idea that we're woven in the womb, right? And when we're made and God creates us, and in his image we're born, and we come in this world, and we're a clean slate, aren't we? That baby that's born that first comes and you hold into your arms, they're a clean slate. They have no biases, they have no hate, they have no prejudice, they have nothing within them. They're a clean slate. And generally in our society, in our world, if things work out the way they should, which they don't always do, but usually the mother is the very first person that's ever going to put the very first strokes on the painting that's going to be that person's life. It begins there, doesn't it? The person that they envision. You know, any artist that sits down in front of a canvas with a paintbrush and a paint, which I've never done because I'm about as artistic as a rock, but any artist that ever does that and sits down and looks at that canvas, in their mind, they've got an idea of what they want that to look like, what they want that painting to be, don't they? They know what they want to represent. My wife's painted a lot in her life and is very good at that, and I've always kind of astounds me. And I said, how do you paint that picture? How do you paint what you do? And she said, well, you just paint what you see. And I always thought, well, that's good if you're able to do that, but you know, I can't draw a straight line, but I understand the concept. You know, when you sit down with a new life and a new child, you had a vision for what you want them to be, for how you want them to turn out, for the type of person that you desire them to become. I think every parent has that, don't they? And every parent that ever holds that child for the first time, when you hold that child in your mind, you're thinking, this child's going to be a lawyer or a doctor or something. You know, we always have these grand visions of what our children's going to be. We always picture them, don't we? We don't always picture our kids being the opposite of that. We don't always say, well, this kid's going to be maybe a drug addict or maybe something else, do we? We always think the positive. We always think of, envision how we want them to be and how we want them to look like and what we want them to represent in their life. And as mothers, you have that first ability to paint them first strokes on that child's life to influence them as to how they will be. My mother always told me when I had kids, she always said to me, she said, if you can't control your kids by the time they're 5, you just as well give up. And you know, and there was a lot of truth in that saying. That, you know, the beginning of a child's life, that influence at the beginning of when they're born is so important in who they become. The Catholic Church always said, give us your child till they're 5 and we'll have them the rest of their life. because they knew how influential them first few years were and how important those were in the development of what a child was to become. And I always imagine that as a child, when you first hold that child, they're a blank canvas. They're waiting for you to draw something upon them. They're waiting for you to influence who they'll be and how they'll be and who they'll wind up. And that's such an awesome responsibility, isn't it, to have that responsibility placed upon us. In the Proverbs 31, talking about a wonderful wife, and we use that passage a lot at funerals and other events. But in Proverbs 31:26, it says, she opens her mouth in wisdom, and the teaching of kindness is on her tongue. And I think that's an amazing thing, isn't it, to think about that. You know, our children, they hear what we say, they look at how we act, how we treat other people. They observe our life, and in a lot of ways, they're going to mimic a lot of those things that we portray. I remember years ago, when we used to have commercials for cigarettes, which I know we don't have anymore, but when we used to have commercials for cigarettes years ago, there was an anti-smoking commercial. And I always remember it because this is about a father thing, but it kind of goes along with mothers. He was going with his father, doing all the things his father did, throwing a stick, doing all these things. And his father sits down by a tree, and he pulls out a pack of cigarettes, and the little boy reaches to do the same thing, right? Kids mimic what we do, how we act, how we treat other people. They see that within us and within our lives. You know, when I thought about this, I thought about Hannah, because I think of all the mothers in the Bible, I always gravitate towards her in 1 Samuel. The mother of Samuel, right? The woman who was barren, who couldn't have children. In 1 Samuel 1, it says, she greatly distressed and prayed to the Lord and wept bitterly, and she made a vow and said, Lord of hosts, if you will indeed look on the affliction of your maidservant and remember me, and not forget your maidservant, will give your maidservant a son, then I will give unto the Lord all the days of his life, and a razor shall never come upon his head. Samuel's one of only 3 men in the Bible who were Nazarites from birth. And he was a Nazarite not because he decided to be a Nazarite, but he was a Nazarite because his mother decided what he was going to look like. His mother was already painting the picture of his life within her mind when she vowed that to the Lord. Before she ever had Samuel, she already had a picture of what she wanted Samuel to look like. Isn't that an amazing thing? I think as mothers and as fathers, it's an amazing thing if we can picture what we want our children to look like in 5 years and in 10 years, and we try to make them look like that, because that's our job, isn't it? That's our job, to try to mold them in and make them into that person that we envision them to become. We have a purpose in life, and the purpose of motherhood is not just to raise a child and make sure they have a roof over their head and make sure they have something in their stomach and to make sure that their physical needs are taken care of. The purpose of motherhood is to mold a person created in the image of God into what God desires them to be, and that's the picture that we should have in our mind for our children. Motherhood is an awesome responsibility. It's way more than we can even begin to imagine or make it out to be. You know, I love my mother, but I'll be honest with you, my grandmother was probably a lot greater influence in my life than probably my mother ever was as far as my spirituality and my walk with God. My grandmother was such a powerful force within my life that way, because she was a mother. My grandmother was a mother her whole life to everybody that she came in contact with. I'm going to talk about that a little bit as we get into this. And she says, so she had this picture of him. And it came about as she continued praying for the Lord that Eli was watching her mouth. As for Hannah, she was speaking in her heart. Only her lips were moving and her voice was not heard. So Eli thought she was drunk. You know, you see the faith of Hannah in this, the faith of Hannah. And you see this faith is going to be emulated in her child. It's so important, isn't it? The faith that you have, what you believe, and the conviction you have within your heart and how you portray that into the lives of your children. It influences them for the rest of their life. And at some point, their faith has to become their own, but it starts with you. It starts with who you are, with your devotion. You know, and jumping on down a little bit in that chapter, Elkanah, her husband, The man Elkanah, he went up with all his household to offer the Lord yearly sacrifice and pay his vow. But Hannah did not go up, for she said to her husband, I will not go up until the child is weaned, and then I will bring him that he may appear before the Lord and stay there forever. You know, in our society, in our world, we wean children pretty fast, like a year old or earlier, we're weaning our children. But in that society, children oftentimes weren't weaned until they were 5 or even 7 years old. Children weren't weaned until way later in life. So when Hannah makes this deal, we're thinking, oh, she's going to take him up when he's a year old. But he could have been as much as 7 years old. And what this shows is the influence, and you just don't see that with Hannah. If you really look at the story of Moses, and you know that account where she took him and she put him in the basket, and Pharaoh's daughter found him, and Pharaoh's daughter took him and gave him back to his mother. Remember that story? Give him back to his mother to raise him. And even though his mother only had him until he was weaned, maybe 5 or 7 years old, Moses knew exactly who he was. Moses knew he was a Hebrew. Moses was upset when his people were being punished, and Moses was going to come back to that, and Moses was going to come back to God. And it wasn't because of the teaching of Pharaoh. It was because of the teaching of his mother before he was weaned, and he took him back into Pharaoh's household. The influence you have on a child in the early years of their life is undeniable. It's undeniable. In this case, she kept him home. She taught him. She nurtured him. This story it astounds me, to be honest. Every time I read this story about Hannah and about a mother and about her love and her desire to have a child, but then her love for God and her desire to fulfill the vow she made to God, and all these things come together in this story. And Elkanah said to her, do what seems best. Remain until you have weaned him. Only may the Lord confirm his word. So the woman remained and nursed her son until she weaned him. Then she had weaned him. She took him up with her in a 3-year-old bowl, an ephah of flour, and a jug of wine, and brought him to the house of the Lord, although the child was young. Hannah took him and left him with Eli, took him and left him at the house of the Lord, took that child whom she had prayed to God for and who she had vowed to God, and she was going to fulfill that vow to God. But when she took this child up there, this child stayed. I always wondered how that went, how she explained that to him. What was his response? But she had brought him up for this, hadn't she? She had trained. That was a picture she had in her mind. She knew this was going to transpire. She was working towards that. She was moving him towards this goal, and he's going to wind up being one of the greatest judges and priests of Israel. But it all started with this mother. It all started with this mother. I don't think you can underestimate that. And so she takes him up and she leaves him in the house of God. She leaves him with Eli the priest, this young boy, and she goes home. This is a story of great faith, isn't it? But it's also a story that speaks volumes about the influence that a mother has upon a child. You know, worship is such a big thing, isn't it? You know, we meet, and I know sometimes it ain't always exactly what you want. Sometimes I'm not on, you know. Sometimes it ain't as good as I could be. Sometimes things don't go just like it should go. You know, I've been a Christian for a lot of years. And, you know, I'm going to tell you, I didn't always look forward to coming to church. I've had a few preachers that I really didn't care that much for, just to be honest about it. And I didn't always look forward to coming. And I worked hard, and sometimes I was tired, and sometimes I was not feeling well, or sometimes I just didn't want to go. But I always did. You know, you teach by example. The children are going to love this church or hate it because of you. I can't stress that enough. I made so many mistakes as a parent. I did. But you know, there's no do-overs on this thing. This is a linear thing. You get one shot at it. When you mess up, you can't go back, right? I mean, I always figured when my kids got in therapy and they started talking about how bad a parent was and they called me up, I was just going to say, whoops. I mean, I don't know what else you're going to say, you know. I mean, you can't go back. But, you know, if I did one thing right, brought my kids to worship. I always brought them. They were always here because I wanted to teach them how important it was to be here. That it wasn't necessarily about the best sermon or the best thing, but it was about God. It was about being here for God. It was about showing up. It was about, but when I think of what I did wrong as a parent in the church, I would think when things didn't go good or there was a problem, my kids heard me gripe about that. When it wasn't just what I wanted it to be or there was an issue, my kids heard me, and they should have never heard that out of my mouth. Because my picture for my children was not to have them bitter or embittered or embattled against the church or to see things in a bad way. My vision for my children was to see them love the church like I love it. And I think as parents, as mothers, and as fathers, we play a big role in that. And what our kids hear us say, and what our kids hear us talk about. And there's conversations our kids probably shouldn't be involved in. You know, she took him up to worship. And if you really look at this passage, and it says, she said, "Oh, my Lord, as your soul lives, my Lord, I am the woman who stood here beside you praying to the Lord. For this boy I prayed, and the Lord has given me my petition. So I have also dedicated him to the Lord. As long as he lives, he is dedicated to the Lord." Samuel never made that decision. Samuel wasn't even involved in it. He's just a child. But Hannah had decided who that child was going to be. She had painted the picture of him in her mind, and he was going to fulfill that. And she had a hand in doing that because she was moving him towards what she envisioned. You see that? And I think that's what God would have us to do with our children, is moving towards what we envision them to be. Because I think that's our job. And he said, so I've also dedicated him to the Lord. As long as he lives, he's dedicated. And listen to what it says at the bottom of verse 28. It says he worshiped the Lord there. You know, he knew what that was. Even as a young child, he understood that. He understood the concept, the principle of what it was, and he fulfilled that. He fulfilled the vision that Hannah had for him before he was ever born. That's an amazing thought to me. And sometimes I just like to dwell on that. And I wish, as a young parent, I wish I had done that better with my children. I wish I had a better vision for them. Because I think when I was a parent, I was just trying to give them what they needed and get them by and help them get there. But I never really had a vision of their life, of what I wanted them to be and what I wanted them to become. And I'm glad, in spite of me, they've turned out well. But sometimes I don't think I had as much to do with that as maybe that I should have had. You know, I love this story, and I bring this up because I want to kind of circle back on that idea of influence in a person's life, and that influence of a woman, of a mother, never really fades or ends. In my life, I've had a lot of women who were like mothers to me. You know, my grandmother was like a mother to me, but it's funny, even in the church, and this is kind of and Eileen, those of you that knew Eileen Reed, of course, she passed away a long time ago, but Eileen mothered me all the time, you know. I mean, she was just like a mother to me. She would call me up, get on to me, you know, you need to be doing this. Why aren't you doing this, you know? She was like that, and I always kind of told her that. I said, you're just kind of like my mother, you know, because she had that influence in my life. And I think as we get older and as women get older and maybe our roles change, but we can still be such a tremendous influence in the life of another person. And I think that never goes away. You know, Ruth is that case where this was her daughter-in-law, right? And the sons had all died, if you know the story of Ruth. Her sons had all died, and it was just these girls that were left, and one goes back, right? Your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and her gods. Return after her. And this is one of those really famous passages of the Bible. And Ruth said, do not urge me to leave you or turn back from following you. For where you go, I will go, and where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. Thus may the Lord do to me and worse, if anything but death parts you and me. You know, the influence of our life doesn't end when our kids are grown. Doesn't end when our kids move off. The influence of our life carries on throughout our entire life. You can influence somebody's life. You can be the mother to them or the father to them that can influence them to be the person they need to be. You can have visions for other people's life and help them to achieve their goals. It's something that never ends with our life as a Christian, because we're always trying to move ourselves, motivate ourselves to be better than we are, and motivate ourselves to new levels, and motivate ourselves to become what God would have us to be and fulfill that picture that God has for our life. You know, motherhood is a tremendous blessing, but it's a tremendous responsibility, isn't it? To have that child in your hands and to hold them and to love them and to nurture them and to want the best for them and to fight off the things that are against them and the evil of this world, and to bring them up in the way that you would have them to be, to make them look like the person that you envision them to be. What a tremendous idea, isn't it? You know, but Mary, she was a mother who didn't see the picture of her son until the end. Mary was a mother who saw her son as being the king of Israel, and probably envisioned him being an earthly king on an earthly throne, probably envisioned him being in glory and honor, being all these things. And yet God had a different picture, didn't he, for Jesus? God's picture of Jesus was him hanging on a cross. God's pictures of Jesus was him being that sacrifice for our sins. But at the beginning of Jesus' life, she had that within her heart, didn't she? A matter of fact, it says that she treasured all those things. We'll look at that verse. But at the end of his life, when he was on that cross, she was still there, wasn't she? You know, her love never quit. Even though he was a son of God, even though he was God's own son, her love for him as a mother never, ever, ever diminished. You know, in this life, we should never, ever have to bury our children. I believe that. But sometimes we do. And there's people in this congregation who have had to bury their children. Mothers who have had to bury their children. And they love them, and they still love them, because a mother's love never, ever, ever ends, ever. Mothers will love their children forever. Isn't it amazing, the love of a mother for her child? You know, hold on to your children. Raise them up. Treasure them when they're little. Treasure them when they're growing. Treasure them when they're grown. Treasure their life. You only get one shot. You only get one go at being a parent. I wish sometimes I could go back, try again. Maybe I do a little better second time around, right? Maybe I know a little more. That's not how life works, is it? God gives us one chance to do things the way God wants us to do them. God gives us one chance to be a godly mother, one chance to be a godly father, one chance to paint a picture for our children of what, not only what we want them to be, but what God desires them to be. And isn't it an amazing journey? Isn't it an amazing journey? You know, as I look out here, I see people like me, whose kids are grown, whose kids are in their jobs and doing their thing, living their life. And I see kids that aren't even started, little babies that have still got to be there, still got to grow there. We don't know what they're going to be. And you know, I'm getting kind of old, and I love our babies so much. You know, one thing, my grandmother always had kids in her house. And she lived to be almost 100, right? But every time somebody would have a kid, my grandmother would say, Lord, she would pray this. She'd say, Lord, just let me live long enough to raise this one, right? Just let me live long enough to raise this one. And she lived to be almost 100 years old. And I don't know how many kids she raised, but it was a bunch. It was a bunch. And she taught us about God, and she taught us about love, and she taught us about helping people, and she taught us so many things because she had a vision of what we should look like when we were grown. Right? Wherever you're at in your life, never stop being that person who has a vision for other people's lives, who knows what they can become and helps them to get there. Whether you're a mother or a father, or whether your kids are grown and you can nurture somebody else, and you can be a Naomi and a Ruth, or you can be whoever that is, be that person, because God desires us all to get each other to heaven, and to give each other faith, and to give each other love, and to grow us and mold us into the people that God would have us to become. So happy Mother's Day. What a blessing if you're a mother. If you're not a mother, what a blessing you can have in someone else's life by nurturing them and helping them to grow into what God would have them to become. You know, each one of us here, our life is a painting, isn't it? Our life's a painting. And we're still painting it as long as we're alive. But one day, our picture will be complete. And the only question we have to ask at the end of it, is that picture what God envisioned for us to be? Have we become and fulfilled the purpose of God within our lives? So may God's blessing be upon you this morning. Thanks for your time. Thanks for your attention. Have a wonderful Mother's Day. If we can help you in any way, won't you let it be known while we stand?